Hi guys, if you are a Sony APS-C shooter, you are absolutely spoiled right now with your choice of wide-angle prime lenses. So I'm going to compare the 4 best in my not-so-humble opinion. We have the Sony 11mm 1.8, the Sigma 12 1.4, the Yongnuo 11 1.8, and the Viltrox 13 1.4. Who will reign supreme? I gotta tell you, after these tests, I was surprised by some of the results. Let's talk about it. So no one is sponsoring this video, no one knows I'm making this video, no one cares probably that I'm making this video, and I personally don't care which of these lenses you might want to purchase, but I do want to give you as much information as possible, so hopefully you can make a more informed decision. Plus, I will leave affiliate links to all 4 lenses, so old Benny wins every time. You know what I'm saying? And I should mention, these aren't the only options. There is a Samyang / Rokinon 12mm f2.0, but in my testing of that lens, I don't think it really competed with these 4 lenses, so I chose these 4 over the Samyang Rokinon. I left that out of this comparison. It is still a decent lens, but it does fall short of all of these 4 lenses, at least in all of the tests that I did. And then, of course, we have the wide-angle zooms that are available. There is a Sony 10-20 f4, there is a Tamron 11-20 f2.8, and a Sigma 10-18 f2.8. I'm going to focus on these prime lenses here. I think anyone who wants a zoom should compare those 3 lenses. Zoom lenses, they start at f2.8, goes to f4. These are a different kettle of fish, in my opinion, so we're going to focus on the primes today. So first, let's talk about the size and build quality of these lenses. The smallest one and lightest one is the Sony 11, and without the caps, that's 181 grams. The next lightest is the Sigma 12. That is 225 grams with no caps, and the Yongnuo is a little bit shorter than the Sigma, as you can see here, but it is made of metal, so it's a bit heavier at 261 grams. The biggest and heaviest is a metal lens from Viltrox. The 13 is 418 grams. So as you can see, like, you compare that to the Sony 11, it is quite big and heavy compared to the other lenses. Still not a huge lens, but in this comparison, definitely the biggest. The Sony lens is made of a hard plastic, except for the metal mount, an autofocus to manual focus switch, a focus hold button, and a 55mm filter thread. A really simple lens to use and a simple lens to look at. The plastic focus ring turns very smoothly, and the Sony is dust and moisture resistant. The Sigma 12 has no buttons or switches, but it does have a clicky aperture ring, and I do love a clicky aperture ring. It is also made of a hard plastic, but has a rubber turning focus ring that is damped just perfectly, in my opinion. It has a metal mount at the base of the lens. It has a 62mm filter size and is dust and moisture resistant. The Yongnuo 11 is an all-metal lens. It feels very premium. It has an autofocus to manual focus switch that they call 1 and 2 because you can actually get a little wireless remote to help you focus pull if you want to do that. It has a programmable focus hold button. It has an aperture ring that can be clicked or declicked, so many more features than both the Sony and the Sigma lens. It has a 58mm filter thread size and is dust and moisture resistant. The Viltrox lens is an all-metal lens. It doesn't have buttons or switches. It does have an aperture ring that turns smoothly, not clicky like the Sigma, so video shooters may prefer that. It has a common 67mm filter thread size, but it doesn't have any form of weather sealing on the lens. Now, a lot of people want a wide-angle lens so they can go out, vlog their pretty faces, and talk their nonsense in their neighborhoods. So let's go compare these 4 side by side right now. Now, of course, the Sony 11 and the Yongnuo 11 are going to have the widest field of view, and the Viltrox will have the tightest, being a 13mm lens, but all 4 can certainly be used for vlogging. But as you can see from the footage, the Sony 11 is the smoothest. Sony first-party lenses play better with the Sony active stabilization than the third-party lens. So if you are looking for the widest field of view that has the smoothest footage when you're using active stabilization, the Sony 11 is definitely the way to go. Now, of course, all of the Sony cameras since the ZV-E10 original, they record gyroscopic data to the SD card, so you can use the free program Catalyst Browse or GyroFlow or the paid program Catalyst Prepare, and you can smooth out the footage from any of these 4 lenses to be even better than a gimbal. It does take a little bit of extra time. I personally think it's worth it. What I like to do a lot is just leave the stabilization off, especially if I'm not using the Sony 11, and then I have the widest field of view possible. I crop in about 4% on Catalyst Browse, and then things go very smoothly on all of the lenses. Now let me show you what all 4 lenses look like here in the studio. This here is the Sony 11. As you can see, too wide for my current setup. You can see my key light, my fill light, my boom mic, and the fact that my ceiling is not perfectly level, and I am not far away from the camera. Look at this. I am touching the lens right there. That is how close I am to the camera, just within arm's length, but you see how wide an 11mm actually is. Here is the Sigma 12, still a really wide field of view, just slightly tighter than the Sony and the Yongnuo. This here is the Yongnuo 11. Now, obviously, if I was going to use a lens like this, I would move the camera closer to me, but as the camera gets closer to you, you will start to get more distorted. You don't want to be too close to your camera's lens, or your features may not be so flattering. And this here is the Viltrox 13mm, and as you can see, a much more sensible field of view when it comes to my specific studio space, not too far off the Sony 15 that I like to use for my regular studio shot. So I think this looks pretty good. I would just have to move the camera in slightly and I would be good to go. So the Viltrox 13 is the way I would go in this studio. When it comes to focusing, I am happy to report all 4 lenses focus fantastically, whether you're tracking, if you're switching subject, AFC, AFS, it doesn't matter. These lenses, they don't hesitate. They grab focus great, even in extremely low light situations. I would give the nod to the first party Sony lens if you were going to do a lot of action burst shooting. So if you're shooting sports or wildlife going really fast, the burst rate will go a little bit better on a first party lens than the other 3 lenses. But unless you're shooting at high burst rates, I don't think you're going to see any difference in the focusing of all 4 lenses. With focus breathing, 3 of the lenses are absolutely perfect. The Sony 11, the Sigma 12, and the Viltrox 13 show no focus breathing. Very, very impressive stuff. The Yongnuo shows a hint of focus breathing. Sharpness, all 4 lenses are very sharp lenses, but the sharpest has got to be the Sony 11. Just by a hair or two, the Sony 11 at f1.8 is the sharpest among all of these lenses at f1.8. Of course, the Sigma can go to 1.4 and the Viltrox can go to 1.4, but at 1.4, they are certainly softer than their own lenses at 1.8, and still, when you stop them down to f1.8, they are not as sharp as the Sony lens. The Yongnuo lens is not far behind the Sony, but basically what I would say is the Sony pulls ahead a little tiny bit here in the sharpness comparison. When it comes to flare, ghosting, and Sunstars, the winner is the Sigma, in my opinion. It has the nicest Sunstars with the most defined points, and it also handles glare and flaring the best. Whereas the Sony and the Yongnuo, I think, are tied for second when it comes to flare and ghosting. The Viltrox 13, this is the weakest area for this lens, and it is the oldest lens of this bunch, and perhaps they weren't using the coatings that are on some of the newer Viltrox lenses, but it still holds contrast well. Flare and ghosting is pretty well controlled, and the Sunstars look pretty nice, but it is behind the other 3 lenses in this category. With lateral chromatic aberration and longitudinal chromatic aberration, this is where I got a big surprise, because the best performer was probably the cheapest lens here, the Yongnuo 11mm f1.8. If you set all lenses to f1.8, I think the Yongnuo does the best. Maybe Sony is as good as the Yongnuo, but certainly this one is top 1 or top 2. The Sigma and the Viltrox fall behind the Sony and the Yongnuo in this category. Even at 1.8, you will see some longitudinal chromatic aberration. The areas in the foreground and the background that are out of focus, the color fringing you see there, that's longitudinal chromatic aberration. Lateral chromatic aberration is good on all 4 lenses, not much of a problem at all. You really won't see any in your photographs. However, the longitudinal chromatic aberration, the Sigma and the Viltrox, not quite as good as the Sony and the Yongnuo. In terms of photo, color, and rendering, I think that the Sigma pops the most. It has the best contrast. Makes a bit of sense. It is the newest lens with the latest technology and coatings. Followed by the Sony 11. The Yongnuo and the Viltrox aren't quite as good straight out of camera as the Sigma and the Sony, but of course, if you are shooting in RAW, you can make the photos look pretty much identical, so I wouldn't use this as a make or break thing. With distortion and vignetting, some people may not worry at all about it because in programs like Lightroom, all of these lenses will have a profile and you can correct them with one click of a button. However, if you are not using profile corrections in your software, then the best thing to do if you're shooting in RAW, remember, if you're shooting in JPEG, it won't matter. There will be in-camera corrections and video in-camera corrections. However, if you are shooting RAW photos and you don't turn on the corrections in your software, then the Viltrox is going to do the best because it's going to have the least amount of barrel distortion, followed by the Yongnuo. The Sigma and the Sony, they have a great deal of barrel distortion, and you definitely need to apply those profile corrections. When it comes to vignetting, all four lenses will show some vignetting when they are down at the lower f-stops. That corrects itself as it goes up. But once again, if you use those profile corrections in Lightroom or other programs, you should be fine. When it comes to the bokeh and the bokeh balls, these are very wide angle lenses, so you're often not getting a ton of background separation. However, when you do get it, it looks quite nice. Now the Viltrox, I think it looks the best, but remember it is the tightest focal length, so that separation is going to look a bit better on the Viltrox 13, but it's smooth on all of these wide-angle lenses if you're down at the lower f-stops and your subject is close enough. With the bokeh balls, I think the winner here is the Yongnuo and the Sony. They are pretty much tied, I think, for best bokeh balls because of that lack of longitudinal chromatic aberration. You're not going to see any color fringing on your out-of-focus bokeh balls, whereas with the Sigma and the Viltrox, you are going to see a little bit. I really like the shape of the Sigma bokeh balls, and the balls are nice and clean, but there is a little bit of color fringing around the edges because of that Bokeh. So again, surprisingly, the Yongnuo did great in this test, and the Sony, maybe not so surprisingly because it is the most expensive of these lenses, depending on what country you live in. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the Sony, of course, I expected to be very good. The Yongnuo, though, wow, right? With price, be sure to check the links for your own country because this can really vary by country. I will talk about the US prices, but for example, I live in Canada and the Sigma is substantially more expensive than the Sony 11 here in Canada, but it is cheaper in the US. Anyway, in the US, the Sony full price comes in at $699. That is its new price with this new world. $699. I think it's on sale right now for $650. But $699 is the full retail price. The Sigma comes in at $629 USD. And then the next most expensive is the Viltrox 13. This is $486 USD. And then the Yongnuo is an impressive $298. So that is a really good price. So what to do? Which lens should you choose? I think it really depends a little bit on what you are trying to shoot. If you want the best budget option, it's the Yongnuo 11. It's wide, you can vlog with it, but when you're vlogging, I would probably use the Catalyst Browse or the gyro flow to get that ultimate smooth footage, but it's still going to give you really nice pictures. It's great in most ways, and it is much cheaper than the other lenses. Now, if you are going to do a lot of studio video shooting, I would choose the Viltrox 13. It is a better focal length, in my opinion, than these other ones because I don't want such a wide field of view. Like I said, I am shooting on a 15 right now. I don't want to go any wider than that. Now, if you're in van life or something like that where the cameras are right here, you may want to go with the Sony 11, Sigma 12, or the Yongnuo 11. But personally, I think this looks a lot better for video work. But if you're going to do a ton of vlogging and you only want to use the active stabilization, you don't want to use that gyro data, the Sony 11 is going to give you the smoothest footage. It's also the sharpest lens out of all four lenses. But the Sigma is a really great overall lens. It's personally my favorite out of the four when it comes to taking photos. I love the way the photos pop coming out of this lens. The flare control is amazing. The glaring control, amazing. The Sunstars are fantastic. So when it comes to photos, I would use this one. Not to mention, it has an f1.4, so it lets in the most light tied with the Viltrox, but that can give you a better background separation than the Yongnuo 11 and the Sony 11, and it'll also help you in a lower light environment, or if you want to do nighttime photography, you're trying to do star trails, things like that, the Sigma 12 is the way to go in my opinion. At 12 millimeters, it is also wide enough to vlog, and it's not too far off the 13, so if you want to use it in the studio, you can do that too. So I can see a lot of people choosing this Sigma lens. Oh my God, it is so hard to choose 4 fantastic lenses. Please write down below which one you have or which one you would want to buy, and then we can all have a nice little discussion about it. Hopefully it will clear it up for some more people. Thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.